Welcome, everybody. This is the University of Arizona Intelligence Community Center of Academic Excellence guest speaker series. And we're happy to have U.S. Department of State senior leader in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. Mark Barron is currently the acting executive director of the Bureau of Intelligence and Research at the U.S. Department of State. Career Foreign Service Officer, you can imagine the depth of experience he has traveling the globe in pursuit of the instruments of national power, which is the diplomatic instrument, but supporting the Department of State with his or her information requirements and intelligence needs. Looking at the broad aperture of geopolitical and socioeconomic issues across the spectrum and in different parts of the world. So Mark, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about yourself, but first I'll give you a quick background of the University of Arizona College of Applied Science and Technology. Our students are very diverse. They come from many different backgrounds. I've had students ask me many questions about foreign service and diplomacy and how it interrelates with the other instruments of national power. How does intelligence even support that effort? Of course, WikiLeaks issued some cables from the past, and that presented a significant security issue. So all these topics are swirling around, I guess, in students' minds, and we've invited them to participate in this to get some takeaways for their career development and also professional development. So our students, again, they're predominantly juniors and seniors in the College of Applied Science and Technology because they join with associate's degrees or enough credits to enter our university. So it's a pathways program where universities. We have special agreements in place with some of our past pathways colleges that allow students to enter into this junior and senior program to finish off their degree. Of note, we do publish internship opportunities in our Dead Drop newsletter. So if any students are listening and you're not on the Dead Drop addressee list, we can add you there. And if you have any questions at any time during the actual guest speaker series with Mark, or questions for us as well as the staff and faculty, present them to the chat, and the moderators, Iris Almazan and Harry Cooper, will address those. Mark, is it okay during natural pauses that we ask you some questions that come up in the chat?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. And the slides here, Mark has told us that we can share them to you after the briefing is completed. And without further ado, Mark, please tell us a little bit about yourself and we'll turn it over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, well, thank you. I very much appreciate the opportunity to brief you. I would have loved nothing more than to have gotten on a plane and gone out to Arizona and be able to do it in person, but we'll try our best online. A little bit about myself. I am a Foreign Service Officer. I've been in the State Department for about 20 years now. Most of my career, about 80%, has been overseas. My assignments include Thailand, Senegal, Senegal, Canada, Japan, Morocco, Iraq, and Kyrgyzstan. I've also served domestically at our headquarters in Washington, and that's where I'm currently at the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. And I certainly can explain more about careers in the Foreign Service during this brief and as well afterwards. It's a great career. Very challenging. You have to like the lifestyle of constantly moving to different countries, but it is a fascinating career. Before I joined the State Department in 2000, I worked for about 13 years in naval intelligence, both on active duty in the Navy and then as a civilian with the Office of Naval Intelligence. So about half of my career has been spent in intelligence in one form or another. And again, it's a fascinating career. I think this is a great program that you have the opportunity to learn about intelligence at the collegiate level. And hopefully this will be an entree, if not to the State Department, then within the larger intelligence community. And I'll talk a little bit about how INR, how we interact with the other agencies and the other elements in the State Department. So with that, let me start the brief. We can go to the next slide now. And I'm going to go off video just so that I can look at my notes and things from here. Okay. So again, classifications and caveats. This is an unclassified briefing. This is actually one of the challenges we have in INR. We work at the top secret level in a SCIF. However, most of our consumers of intelligence within the State Department don't have the same level of access or clearance that we do. So we need to make sure that the intelligence that we disseminate is timely, it's informative, but it's also at the right level. So this briefing to you today is similar to how an intelligence analyst may have to shape their briefing to one of the policymakers at the State Department, just to make sure that we are not inadvertently disclosing classified information or methods and sources to someone who doesn't have the clearance. A couple of other caveats. The examples I give here in this brief on some of our work are just for illustrative purposes only. They're pretty, I don't get into a lot of detail just because we have to keep it at the unclassified level. And I do welcome your questions, but I will note that I am not a public affairs officer. I'm not an official spokesperson for the State Department. So any questions about State Department policy or our programs overseas, I will most likely simply refer you to our website for the official answers. And again, that's part of intelligence work as well, is knowing what you can say and what you can't say. And sometimes the answer is simply to refer someone to the official guidance rather than offering an opinion which is not approved by your agency. So with that, let's go to the next slide. So just an overview of the brief. I'll start with a little bit of background and context on the State Department, what the State Department does, our mission, and how we're organized both at our headquarters in Washington and overseas. Then we'll drill down and spotlight onto INR, the history, the organization, what our role is within the intelligence community, how we interact with the IC, what we actually do on a day-to-day basis, our analysis and production and intel coordination, and then the future of INR. I will say right now, INR is in a state of change. We are looking to modernize and sort of advance where we're at compared to our history. And I'll get into that in more detail. And then finally, talk a little bit about how you may be able to start working at the State Department and specifically INR. I'll be very honest up front. We are a small intelligence agent element. We only have about 350 people total, so that when we recruit, we're often side by side with the CIA, NSA, DIA, NGA, the larger intelligence elements that have many, many more openings. We don't offer that, but we are very aggressively recruiting, and especially our internship program. We have a very active internship program for college students that will give you a firsthand opportunity to work within INR. So I'll look forward to explaining that as well. Next slide. So the Department of State, we're based in Washington, just a few blocks from the White House. If you know Washington, the Lincoln Memorial, we're sort of right across the street from the Lincoln Memorial. Mike Pompeo is our Secretary of State. He's been in office now for more than 2 years. The Secretary of State is a senior cabinet official in the U.S. government. He's fourth in line to the presidency after the vice president, the Speaker of the House, and the President pro tem of the Senate. And I'm biased, obviously. I'm a State Department person, but I think the Secretary of State is probably the most prestigious position within the cabinet. And if you go overseas, when the Secretary of State goes overseas, he gets a lot of media attention because he's really representing the country and representing the president. So when he makes a speech, when he gives an interview, that gets a lot of press coverage. because essentially he's a proxy for the president in terms of what policies and initiatives he's talking about. So the State Department, the role, of course, is diplomacy. Go back a previous slide, please. The State Department, our role is diplomacy. And I'm sure you're aware diplomacy is one of the instruments of national power that any government can draw upon. It's a little bit different than, say, the military component of national power, in that our military, of course, I think, my opinion, I think most people would agree, is second to none. We have the best equipment, the best training, the best personnel in the world, and we can use our military in a crisis situation, if necessary, to overwhelm almost all countries in the world. We do have some near-peer competitors now in China and Russia, but certainly our military it would be tough to beat. Diplomacy isn't the same way. All countries can use diplomacy more or less on an equal footing. It doesn't matter how many diplomats we have in a room when we're negotiating with another country. It's still a one-on-one, one country negotiating with another country. So that often will frustrate a president, frustrate a secretary of state, frustrate the Congress, in that the United States, the richest country in the world with the best military in the world, is not able diplomatically simply to go in and to force another country to do what we want to do. We can try, and there are ways we can do it through what's called coercive diplomacy. It may be using an embargo or putting sanctions on a country to force them into our position, but that's not always possible. So one of the keys to diplomacy is having good intelligence. When we are negotiating with a country, we need to have the most up-to-date, accurate information so that our policymakers, whether it's the secretary himself, whether it's a deputy secretary, an assistant secretary, an ambassador, they need to have the information available in order to negotiate, because we can't simply overwhelm another country with physical force. We have to use our negotiating skills and what we have to offer through the State Department. Next slide. So our organization oversees, as you can see, worldwide. We're in almost every country in the world. We don't have formal diplomatic relations with the government of Iran and the government of North Korea. And a couple of smaller countries around the world, we don't necessarily have an embassy in those countries, but we have a neighboring country where the embassy is responsible for. So it's a worldwide presence. For most of the period after World War II, we were the undisputed leader in overseas diplomacy. Now the government of China over the last 5-10 years has been very aggressively moving forward with opening new embassies and consulates and using their diplomatic instrument of power on their behalf. What's often called either a checkbook diplomacy or a debt trap diplomacy, especially with smaller, poorer countries, of providing loans and investments to those countries in return for those countries heeding a Chinese policy line. Unfortunately, many countries, I just did a study in Ecuador, they take the money and then find out later that they're unable to repay it. So that's a differing approach that China has with the United States. Next slide, please. Domestically, this is our organization. As you can see, it's pretty large. A lot of different offices. We call these bureaus. Each circle or rectangle is a bureau. We have about 40. The ones on the left of the slide, those are our regional bureaus that have specific geographic focus around the world. The other bureaus are what we call functional bureaus that don't have any specific country or region, but work on policy issues worldwide. Now, it's important to note that our diplomacy we do diplomacy overseas, negotiating with governments, but those countries overseas also have embassies here in Washington, so that we're also conducting diplomacy here in the United States. So a country, if they have an interest and they want to negotiate something with the United States, they will come to the State Department in Washington and we will negotiate there, or we can do it overseas in their country. And again, the information and the intelligence that we provide to the policymakers, beginning with the Secretary of State, but to each of these bureaus, is critical in how we conduct our diplomacy. So the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, with the circle, reports directly to the Secretary of State. Our Assistant Secretary has a direct, her boss is the Secretary. And the secretary, depending on what the issue is, they will call INR and request or ask for a brief on whatever particular topic or subject is needed at the time being. So we have a very close working relationship with all of the senior policymakers within the Department of State. Next slide, please. Drilling down now a little bit into INR itself, if you notice in the lower left-hand corner, there's a 75. This is our 75th anniversary of being part of the State Department. In a normal year, we would have been doing a lot of celebrations this month, because September 1945, right after the end of World War II, is when INR came into existence. We came out, as you can see on the left side of the slide, the analysis and research branch of the Office of Strategic Services. That was the precursor to the CIA. So even before the CIA formed out of the OSS, a lot of OSS was integrated into the State Department. So the State Department is the oldest civilian intelligence element in the United States. I think the Office of Naval Intelligence has the honor of being the oldest overall from a military standpoint. So you can read through the slide and look at our history. I'll just highlight the last bullet on the right in the 2020, underneath 2020. You know, back in March, and you all experienced the same thing that we did in Washington. We went to immediate lockdown and were not able to go into work because of COVID-19. That posed a challenge for us because our analysts were used to working at the top secret level, and now they were told to stay home, but we needed to continue to work from home. Well, how can you do that in an unclassified environment when previously we were working in a classified environment? And more or less on the fly, we had to come up with a new way, what we call commentary, which is using open source intelligence for products that policymakers can use. And again, many of the policymakers were also working from home and were not in a position to be reading classified information. So the world didn't stop because of COVID-19, but the way we did intelligence had to change because of the pandemic. And that's one way, being a small organization, we were able to quickly adjust our operating methods. Next slide, please. So our Assistant Secretary is Ellen McCarthy. She is a political appointee. Has been in the office now for about 18 months, but her background as well is in the IC. She used to work at NGA, DIA, she worked for Coast Guard Intelligence, and she started out with ONI. So she brings a broad background and perspective to her role as an assistant secretary. So again, she reports directly to the Secretary of State. She is his principal intelligence advisor for his requirements. And if you notice the two seals above her. The one to the left, as you would expect, is our INR seal as part of the State Department. The one to the right is the seal for the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence. INR Assistant Secretary McCarthy has a unique role within the State Department. She reports both to the Secretary of State, but she also reports to the Director of National Intelligence, and we cooperate and coordinate our activities through the DNI as part of the intelligence community. So it's a little bit unique for INR within the State Department to have a State Department person actually have responsibilities outside of the department. Next slide, please. Just quickly, some INR by the numbers. We are one of three all-source agencies in the IC, along with the CIA and DIA. We do have a 24-hour INR watch. Obviously, we are in virtually every country in the world, so if it's the middle of the night in the United States, it's the middle of the day Asia, and things that are going on, we need a watch that can make sure that we have all of the latest intelligence at any point during the day or night. As you can see, we put about 2,500 products out per year, 300 to 500 intelligence briefing packets per week. If you remember, think back to the organization chart, the domestic one for the State Department. Each one of those little rectangles, almost all of them, we brief multiple times every week on the latest intelligence so that they have the information that they need to do their job. So that's a major part of our focus, is to make sure our policymakers within the State Department have the latest intelligence. 200 plus Intel analysts, as you can see, many of them have been in for a long time. They're subject matter experts. Many have PhDs, as you can see, or other advanced degrees. And then finally, and I'll get into this in a little bit, our organization. We are organized similar to the State Department in that we have both offices that focus on specific regions of the world, and we also have offices that focus worldwide, but on specific topics such as cybersecurity, for example. And then you can see sort of the rest of the numbers of INR. Next slide, please.
Mr. Barry, we have a question from the audience. Can you hear me?
Sure. Yes, I can. Go ahead.
You have to take the Foreign Service exam in order to work for INR.
No, you don't. That's a good question. I should point out that about 80% of INR and most of our analysts are civil service. And I'll explain the difference in a little bit, but you don't have to take the Foreign Service exam to be an analyst at INR. That's a good question, and when we get to the end of our brief, I'll explain in more detail the difference between Foreign Service and Civil Service.
Thank you.
Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we have a dual role, both INR reporting to DOS and also within the IC to ODNI. So we coordinate on our budget, our human resources, our emergency preparedness. Again, the State Department, INR, if there were another event like 9/11, an attack on the United States, a possible attack on the White House or the Congress, INR has to be prepared to continue operating if, for example, the headquarters building of the State Department was also under attack. We do have alternate facilities where our watch and our analyst can deploy to in the event. Hopefully that will never happen, but we prepare for that. We have drills and exercises. Many of our exercises, of course, are with the IC through DNI. So continuity of government, continuity of operations is a major focus of INR to ensure that our diplomacy at all times can continue regardless of the situation at hand, even if the United States suffered another terrorist attack like 9/11. We do have liaison officers from other agencies, NSA, NGA, DIA, for example. And then we also have very active detail assignments. So INR analysts will go to other IC elements and work, say, for the CIA for 2 years, and likewise an analyst from CIA will come to INR and work for 2 years. In that way, it fosters both coordination and cooperation, because within the IC, if we have direct experience working with other agencies, obviously we understand their missions, we understand how they do their jobs better, they understand how we do our jobs better. And again, this was sort of the after effects of 9/11, the creation of DNI, and to ensure better coordination throughout the IC. So next slide. So here's how INR is organized. And again, if you think back to how the State Department is organized, we have sort of the same setup. So geographic offices, Asia, Africa, Near East, South Asia, Western Hemisphere, but then we also have topical offices like economic analysis, the geographer and global issues, terrorism, narcotics, and crime. So those are the green offices in the center, are really the core of our analysis and production. The pink offices to the right, what those offices are to make sure we have good intelligence collection, coordination, and liaison, both within the State Department, but also within the IC, and also with our embassies worldwide. And the offices to the left are not analytical offices, but they also produce information that is used by policymakers. So, for example, the Office of Opinion Research, what they will do is polling operations in countries overseas. So, for example, if there's going to be an election in Argentina, 6 months from now, policymakers will want to know what is happening. What do the opinion polls in Argentina say? So the Office of Opinion Research will commission and do polling of the population so that we get a better sense of who might win that election. And based on that, we are better prepared if we need to make shifts in our policy. Likewise, the Office of Analytic Outreach, what they do is sponsor events where we bring in experts throughout the country on a particular topic so that policymakers can hear from subject matter experts both within the government and with think tanks in Washington and at the academic university level. On a particular topic. So, for example, the Arctic, that's been in the news a lot the last few years. Russia is very aggressively pursuing advances in the Arctic. Canada, the United States, the EU. China is not an Arctic nation, but they call themselves near Arctic nation. They also are very aggressively looking at the Arctic. So we would bring together experts on climate change, on the Arctic region, on the different countries that are involved in the Arctic, so that our policymakers can get an overall perspective of what the situation is so that they are better prepared when they meet with their counterparts from other countries. Next slide, please. So how do we actually do our work? I'll give probably the biggest example we have, which is China. If you've read the National Security Strategy of the United States, China and Russia, of course, are the two predominant countries in our strategy. And China, as I mentioned before, is very aggressive diplomatically and throughout the world. So it starts on the left-hand side with the Office for East Asia and Pacific. Within that office, there is a division, our China office. And within the China office, there are analysts who are experts on China. They speak the language, they know the history, they know the government, they know how the country operates, and they study it intensely day in and day out. They are supported, of course, by the INR Watch, because, again, there may be something that happens in the middle of the night that an analyst needs to know about right away. But that's not where it ends. In the middle two columns, you see all of these other analytical offices also have a role in studying China. The analysts in these offices are not necessarily experts on China. They're experts in their particular subject field that China has an involvement with. So the Office of Economic Analysis, obviously China has a huge economy. They're very aggressive with their economy and economic trade. So the analysts in that office are looking at China. Likewise, strategic proliferation and military issues. China, their nuclear weapons program, their program in the South China Sea, other military initiatives, the issues along the China-India border, for example. And again, you can go down through each of the offices on the first column in the middle. The second column in the middle, these are the geographic offices, but again, with China being very aggressive overseas, an analyst in West Africa who specializes in West Africa, for example, in the analysis for Africa, he may have information on China's programs and initiatives in a country such as Senegal. He will coordinate that with his counterparts in the East Asia and Pacific office. And then finally, on the right-hand side are the offices that provide, as I said earlier, some coordination and outreach support. So what you have with China, as you can see, it's not just one office that is looking at China. It's upwards of more than a dozen that are all working together. And this is just one example. You can make essentially the same drawing for Russia, for any other country in the world or any other region in the world. It's never just one office. It's a combination of offices that are working in concert with one another. This is one of the advantages of being a small element, is that all of these analysts have worked together. They know one another. There's not a huge distance physically in where they're located. So it's easy for us to cooperate and work together in order to support our policymakers. Next slide. So how we do the analysts, they're working, how do we actually support our customers? Again, INR is in the middle. If you recall, we have our two organizations. We have our domestic organizations, and we have our overseas post. So I'll start in the lower right-hand corner, our post, our embassies overseas. Before any of these senior officials go overseas to assume their positions, INR, we will brief them to make sure they have the latest information and intelligence on their particular country. So if you've just been confirmed by the Senate to be the next ambassador, the next U.S. ambassador to Jordan, INR will work with you to make sure you have the latest information, not only on Jordan, but the Middle East, the larger Middle East, so that when you go into the country, you have the most up-to-date information. But as you can see, the arrow is two ways, because now that the policymakers and the officials are overseas, they are in a position to provide inputs back to INR based on what they see, their meetings with government officials, their observations of how the government, who is in and who is out. This is firsthand knowledge that you can be an analyst in INR back at headquarters, but a foreign service officer overseas will be in a position to see things that that analyst will not be able to see firsthand. And many times, what a diplomat overseas, it will be small, subtle things. A diplomat, an American diplomat, may be at a reception, for example, and he's meeting with one of his contacts in the host nation government. And they're having a nice conversation, but he notices when he asked about the prime minister's health of that country that the official from the host nation gets very reticent and doesn't want to talk about it and tries to change the subject. Now, that may not be anything, but that may be just a little tidbit that he can send back to INR so that the INR analyst at headquarters has that little piece of information that perhaps the prime minister, maybe he's sick, maybe he is not going to be in the office much longer. That obviously is not enough really to create a full intelligence report, but it's a little piece of information that they can use. Again, the same domestically in our headquarters, as I talked about earlier, we brief our bureaus within the department on a daily basis, but we also get their insights as well in terms of what they are looking at, what their requirements are, so that our analysts know to be looking for certain things that our bureaus can use in order for them, when they're meeting with their foreign counterparts, to have the most up-to-date information. And then on the left side, of course, we coordinate with our other counterpart agencies within the IC, both OD&I and all of the other elements. And I have a little dashed line here. The overseas post, embassies, of course, have State Department, but they also have representatives from other departments within the government. So, for example, the Defense Department, DIA, runs the defense attaché programs, which operate out of embassies. So a naval attaché in Japan, for example, he will file a report that DIA officer, the defense attaché, that will go directly to DIA. So although they are working at the embassy, that doesn't mean they necessarily report directly back to INR. That's where hopefully there's coordination between DIA and INR in terms of coordinating the information flow. This is a very simplified model. It can get convoluted at times in terms of regions and who's responsible for what. And that, again, is one of the roles of OD&I, hopefully, is to deconflict and make sure that the intelligence elements are working together and not at cross purposes. Next slide.
Mr. Barron, we have two questions from the floor.
Mm-hmm.
I understand the Department of State has law enforcement authority and capability. How does that work out for the intelligence to provide? For example, supporting law enforcement intelligence matters and security matters for the Department of State.
Could you repeat the last part of the question again?
How does that, I'll just repeat the whole one. I understand
Okay,
the Department of State has law enforcement authority and capability. How does that work out for intelligence you provide? An example, supporting law enforcement intelligence matters and security matters for Department of State.
Okay, that's a good question. The State Department doesn't have itself law enforcement authority. We're not like the FBI or DEA, for example, that both have our law enforcement agencies that work out of embassies overseas. The State Department works with law enforcement in other countries in order what's called capacity building to increase their capabilities. We support their intelligence requirements of host nations through cooperative programs. These are, of course, with allied and friendly countries. So we cooperate, for example, with Mexico, the government of Mexico, on trying to stop drug trafficking coming up from South America. So we will work with the Mexican government both on capacity building to train their police forces, to equip their police forces, to coordinate intelligence with our intelligence counterparts, law enforcement counterparts in Mexico. But the State Department itself doesn't have any specific or direct law enforcement authorities to conduct operations. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, sir. Do you want to take the other one, or would you like to wait on taking our next question?
No, go ahead.
Okay, our next question, also from our audience. How does INR watch floor engage and interact with other 24-hour watch floors in the IC?
Yeah, that's an excellent question too, because obviously, and you can imagine virtually every IC element, in fact, probably every IC element has its own 24-hour watch. And that is the critical watch function, is to be able to know how to contact, whether it's the FBI watch or the CIA watch, DIA, who to contact, when to contact. Our watch officers are junior, normally relatively junior foreign service officers who come in for a one-year assignment. And it's a very intense year because they have very specific SOPs that they have to follow. If it's 3 in the morning and you're the person on the watch and you get a call, you need to know exactly who to call, who to contact, not only within the State Department, but throughout the IC. What information you can release, what information you need to obtain. That's all part of being a watch officer. It's a very demanding job. It's a very structured job because you have to be able to make these decisions quickly in real time. If there's an evolving event, for example, that's not something you can wait 6 hours until the people that work during the day can come in and take over. You have to know that. So it comes down to training, it comes down to SOPs, it comes down to knowing how to engage with your counterparts within the IC. So it is a challenge. It doesn't always work perfectly. Almost any crisis situation, they will look back and they will realize that information perhaps did not flow as quickly from the State Department to the Pentagon as it probably could have. Those are lessons learned that are incorporated into training and developing better SOPs so that hopefully in the future it doesn't happen again. But it's rarely do you get 100% efficiency on any particular event. There's almost always some lesson learned, and that's just the reality of the IC and intelligence on a day-to-day basis. I hope that answered that question. Okay, any other questions?
Not right now, sir.
Okay, I'll go ahead. So INR in the future, I've talked a lot about INR now. And as I mentioned at the start of the brief, we're really kind of in a period of change. There's been a recognition that as the world has changed, and you can read the text box there, INR as an institution, we need to change with it. We need to become more nimble. We need to look at different types of threats. Quite frankly, INR, if you look at the history of INR, it came literally right at the end of World War II. So it was built for a Cold War era from the 40s into the end of the 90s, and it has been slowly changing over the last 20 years, but the reality is that the world itself has been changing more rapidly. And so INR if we are going to support policymakers both within the State Department and overseas, and also maintain our role within the IC, we as well have to change and adapt and develop new ways of doing business. So we have 4 key priorities, and I'll go over each of the 4 now. So next slide, please. So the first is kind of the basic one of building on our foundation. You can see in the text box, we need to have better business analytic tools. We need to know how our intelligence is benefiting our stakeholders. Is this the information that they need, or are we producing reports that we think are being read and used and in reality are not? So that's a major initiative. We need to review our resources against requirements, realign our investments. Do we have too many assets focused on Russia and not enough on China, for example? That's an obvious one. Do we need to put more resources into a particular part of the world? Is there something that we are missing that we need to start looking at? Strategic planning capability so that we know what our plans are aligned with not only the State Department plans, but the IC requirements as well. So this is building the foundation to make sure we have the capability to continue functioning effectively into the future. Next slide, please. So enhanced support to senior policymakers. Again, our overseas diplomats, we need to make sure they have the information readily available. This has often been a problem, is getting information overseas quickly so that the diplomat in West Africa has it in his hands when he needs it and not 3 days later when it's too late. So we need platforms, better user-friendly, accessible, protected against unauthorized access, which is a major issue throughout the IC. We have to have better websites and tools and all types of data. And again, as I mentioned at the first part of the brief, COVID-19 forced us to essentially learn how to better utilize open source intelligence, but we also have to learn how to develop data visualization tools and other techniques that we don't have right now, which other IC elements, quite frankly, probably are doing a better job than we are at the moment. So another of our priorities. Next slide. So again, diplomatic needs and what we need to focus on. I already mentioned cyber emerging technologies. This has probably been the biggest focus of INR over the last 5 years, is to make sure that everything that is going on in the world technologically, we understand and are able to advise policymakers on what this means to them. That means we have to have the workforce with the right skills to provide intel support. It doesn't necessarily mean we need a PhD in political science. It may mean someone who comes from Silicon Valley without an advanced degree, but they understand the latest in technology. And again, we need to expand our capabilities just to reduce or mitigate our weaknesses, but reduce our overlap and risk. This is right now making sure we're not having anything fall through the cracks of our organization. And then finally, the next slide. This might be the most interest to you as students, is we have to get a better workforce. We have, I think, a top-notch workforce now, but there's a recognition that we need a more diverse workforce. We need a workforce that has different skill sets. We have to have better career tracks so that we can recruit and hire more quickly. This is an issue for us in that sometimes, quite frankly, we lose good people to other intel elements simply because our bureaucracy within the State Department were not quick enough in order to offer them a job. And so a good person, someone with talent and skill, will be hired by another Intel element. And again, we need to do better in outreach and recruiting so that we can bring officers in who have a diverse background and bring different perspectives than what our previous INR profile was. So this is, again, a major effort going on. Next slide. So following on to that, in terms of employment at the State Department and how you may be able to work, as I mentioned, there are two different types of employees. There are the Foreign Service officers and the Civil Service. Civil service is like really most of the government is civil service. Foreign service is unique to the State Department and a couple of other, the Commerce Department and the Agriculture Department. I'm not going to read through all of this. I would encourage you to go to our websites and get more information. If you're interested in the Foreign Service, there is a lot of information on what the test is about, how to prepare for the test, what the career fields are, how to become a Foreign Service officer. On the Civil Service, the difference between the two, the Foreign Service, you don't have to have any specialized skill in one area. We're looking for candidates who have an overall solid background, but don't necessarily have to be an expert in one particular field. Whereas in the Civil Service, we hire based on an open position. So for example, if we have an opening in our China office, we may need somebody who can speak Spanish or who has direct experience working in China. So you may or may not qualify for that position, depending on what your background is, what your training is, your education, your prior work experience. But these are the two main functions. As I mentioned, most of INR is on the right side. Most are civil service. About 20%, myself included, are foreign service. Foreign service at INR, we're only there for 2 or 3 years, and then we move on to another assignment. It's sort of like the military, where you're at a station for a couple of years, and then you move to your next assignment. The civil service, if you're hired, you may spend the rest of your career, the next 25, 30 years, working in that office. And because that's your specialty, that's your skill set, that's your expertise, and you won't move out of that office. So that's really the difference between foreign service and civil service. Next slide, please. Intern opportunities. Since I've been at INR, I've seen probably more than 20 interns, most college undergraduates, do phenomenal work within our bureau. They're giving meaningful assignments. They do great work, and for them, it's a chance to work directly with seasoned intelligence professionals on specific projects that will help them later on as they seek full-time employment. So we have unpaid internships throughout the year. Right now, because of COVID-19, we are doing virtual internships because we can't bring our interns into the department. I realize that for some people, unpaid student internships are not an option. You do obviously have to be able to support yourself or have family members, parents, or other family members who can support you. And this is an issue that we are looking at within INR because we realize we are missing out on good people who may not be able to say, I can't take 10 weeks and I don't have the funds to be able to support myself in Washington, D.C. So we are looking at that as perhaps how we can get more people internship opportunities. Next slide, please. Pathways program, again, this is throughout the federal government. We've had Pathways who have started out in internships and have converted to full-time employees. It is a great program, and within INR, we are actively looking at this because it's a great way to bring in young talent who is right out of college to fill our junior positions. So there are different types of programs that are under pathways. I won't read through this, but I would encourage you to look at the State Department website, state.gov, which will provide you more information on pathways. Next slide. The best advice I can give to you in terms of working for INR through an internship program is if you get your foot in the door through an internship, that gives you a leg up. You're looking at the inside out instead of being on the outside looking in. An internship, even if it's only a 10-week program, it will give you exposure within our bureau. I will give you an example. We had an internship in the spring. This was before COVID. Did a great job, did his 10 weeks, really made a great impression, and then he went back to school. He was at American University in Washington, D.C. He is now, we have recontacted him, and we will be hiring him probably next year after he graduates, just based on that internship opportunity. He's proven himself. He did a super job. So that's how we would like to use interns as a feeding ground, as a feeder for us to be able to recruit the next generation of analysts and personnel at the State Department and INR specifically. So that concludes the brief. I'm again, welcome any questions that you might have.
Mr. Barron, you mentioned virtual internships as an option. Is this something that will continue after COVID-19 and operations resume, or is that temporarily because of COVID-19?
No, virtual internships were before COVID-19. Obviously, during COVID now, we've expanded them, but they will continue after COVID-19. So it has nothing to do with COVID-19 itself, the pandemic. I should also point out virtual internships, you can work virtually for an embassy overseas. The embassies may have a particular topic that they would like a college student or a group of college students to work on. You don't necessarily have to travel to that country. You just have to do the research in conjunction with your regular schoolwork. But that is a great way to get, again, that foot in the door, either through a virtual internship.
Great, thank you. We do have one follow-on question to that. Are there specific hours for the virtual internships, or can a person moonlight after a regular 9-to-5 job?
No, that's a great question. That's one of the advantages of virtual internships is you can work whenever you want to. I mean, for whether it's INR, the State Department, or an overseas embassy, they don't really care how you get the work done. So if you're working in the middle of the night on their project, it doesn't matter to them. So that it gives you maximum flexibility, nights, weekends, between classes. You can divide the work up if you have more than one person on a team. Really, I think from INR and the State Department standpoint, we're looking at the result, the production, not so much how you do it. So it's a great way to be able to go to school, you can work, and then you can do a virtual internship all at the same time.
Fantastic, thank you. Any other questions? Please put them in the chat.
It looks like we don't have any follow-up questions. And if you do, this is Craig Nazareth, the program director. Just post those to the emails that we've posted in the chat to Iris Almazan or CC myself. And we'll also make sure this briefing is sent out to those involved in the presentation and also the distribution for the students. A lot of great opportunities. We'll capture those in the dead drop. And Mark, what an amazing, insightful briefing into the State Department's INR. I mean, this is a first for me too. I didn't know the breadth and extent of your operation, so this is very helpful.
Thank you very much. And again, any questions, feel free. Craig, he has my contact information. I'm not necessarily an expert on all of our programs and opportunities, but I know who the experts are, and I can connect you with them. But certainly, any interest you have, feel free through Craig to let me know, and I can give you as much information as you'd want. So it was a pleasure. I hope I answered some questions and gave you some information, useful information about INR. I realize we don't have quite the high profile that CIA or FBI has in terms of the public consciousness. So we are within INR. We are actively trying to let people know who we are and what we do.
No, definitely, Mark. Thank you. And I guess another follow-up to our discussion of topics and internship for research. Would INR be able to share some topics with maybe our capstone or even our university so that we can publish those to our students? And if they want to write on a certain topic, maybe they can get published with INR's newsletter or support some production effort ancillary to any even internship.
No, that's a good question. Let me check with the production, the analysis and production staff. I think they would be very receptive to that. I think again, from INR's looking forward is using different research techniques and different resources at the university level. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone who's not in the IC can't contribute through open source research. So I'll follow up and talk to you offline on that, Craig.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Patrick, you're on. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, that was a wonderful brief. A lot of stuff I didn't know, and I really appreciate the breadth of knowledge that you brought, and I'm very glad I had an opportunity to listen to you. So thank you.
No, thank you. Again, I would have preferred to have done it on purpose or in person. I will say State Department, we're not a PowerPoint organization per se compared to DOD and maybe some of the other IC elements. We tend to do more on written cables and written reports. So this was a good opportunity for me to get back in the PowerPoint realm that I used to do in ONI. So.
Okay, with that being said, I'll close the guest speaker series, and we'll try to post the video as soon as possible and send a link out to all the participants. Thank you very much, everyone, and thank you, Mark Barron, for your service, especially, and your continued service.
All right, thanks, Craig. Thank you.